As usual, the man shut down the machine and prepared to leave work, but the hatch suddenly malfunctioned and got stuck. To avoid having his pay docked by his supervisor, the man immediately broke the rules and squeezed inside. Little did he know that this action would completely change his fate. Just as he was about to inspect the malfunction, the faulty hatch suddenly closed on its own. The next second, lethal radiation began to leak from inside. Hearing the screams coming from within, his co-workers hurriedly grabbed tools to pry the hatch open. Otherwise, the man would soon die from radiation exposure. But their efforts were stopped on the spot by the supervisor, who argued that the equipment inside was extremely expensive, and they couldn't afford to pay for any damage caused by prying it open. Only after all internal procedures had been completed did a robot slowly enter and drag Max out. Although Max's life was temporarily spared due to exposure to high-intensity radiation, his organs had already begun to fail. He wouldn't survive more than 5 days at most. But when the boss learned of the accident at the factory, he didn't care at all about Max's life or death. Instead, he asked if the equipment had been damaged. Clearly, the boss was only concerned with his own interests and didn't care at all about the workers' lives. In the end, he only prescribed Max 5 days worth of painkillers and ordered him to leave the factory immediately. It was only then that Max saw the boss's true, despicable nature. He swore he would make the boss pay a terrible price. After being kicked out, Max returned to the slums. He knew that to survive, he had to go to the fabled Elysium to receive treatment in a top-tier medical pod. But that place was located on a space station, a place only the wealthy could access. The poor had absolutely no way of getting in, so Max had no choice but to seek out the hacker Spider, who could forge a legitimate Elysium citizenship and find a way to smuggle them onto the space station. But this would inevitably cost a lot of money. When Spider heard that Max wanted to board the ship on credit, he immediately tried to kick him out. Upon learning that Max had only 5 days left to live, the kind-hearted Spider offered to give him a ticket for free, but he had one small request: that Max do something no ordinary person would dare to do. Although Max knew this task might be extremely difficult, he had no choice but to agree in order to stay alive. It turned out that Spider wanted Max to rob a wealthy man who was on a business trip to Earth from Elysium, none other than the heartless boss who had fired him. Spider planned to extract the data from the tycoon's brain and ultimately seize his fortune for himself, but Max was physically weak at the moment. Spider, however, wasn't the least bit worried. He pushed Max into an operating room, implanted a computer chip into his brain, and finally fitted him with a set of exoskeleton armor. This armor was closely linked to his nervous system, enabling Max to unleash superhuman strength. With no time to think, the transformed Max set off immediately. Meanwhile, the tycoon, escorted by 2 robot guards, was preparing to return to Elysium to enjoy his life, completely unaware that someone was planning to attack him. The next second, Max fired a shot that hit the spaceship, causing it to crash on the outskirts of the city. Seeing this, Max immediately drove off in pursuit. But just then, the 2 robot guards charged out and launched a counterattack against Max and his team. Fortunately, Max reacted quickly. With a barrage of attacks from his teammates, he blew one of the robots to pieces. Then, working together with his companions, he ripped the head off the other robot. But just then, the tycoon was shot in the midst of the battle. Seeing that he was on the brink of death, Max had no choice but to synchronize the data from the tycoon's brain. Only after the copy was complete did he realize that the data in the tycoon's brain had turned into garbled code, with fighter jets closing in on them. Max and his team had no choice but to flee quickly, but the spaceship was filled with the world's top-tier agents. Where could Max and his team possibly run? Taking advantage of the cover provided by the surrounding sandstorm, Max had no choice but to abandon his teammates and make a run for it. He finally escaped to a densely populated area, but Max knew he had become a wanted man, so going to a hospital for treatment was out of the question. He remembered that his ex-girlfriend was a nurse. Max had no choice but to sneak into his ex-girlfriend's home. Fortunately, she had some medical equipment there, which allowed Max's body to recover effectively for the time being. But when Max woke up the next day, he discovered a little girl walking out of the house. Only then did Max realize that his ex-girlfriend was now married. To avoid endangering the mother and daughter, Max prepared to leave. But then the woman told him her daughter had cancer and begged Max to take her to Elysium for treatment. But Max could barely save himself right now. How could he possibly protect a child as well? So he immediately refused his ex-girlfriend's request and turned to leave her home. But as soon as he stepped outside, he noticed a drone had locked onto him.